The radish. Few vegetables reward impatience quite like the radish, a root crop that pushes from bare soil to a crisp, peppery harvest in as little as 3 to 4 weeks, faster than almost anything else grown in a home garden. Seeds go directly into loosened soil about half an inch deep and an inch or two apart, needing no indoor starting, no transplanting shock, and almost no fertilizer to reach a full-sized bulb. The plant thrives in the cool temperatures of early spring or late summer, tolerating light frost without complaint while bolting quickly if pushed into the heat of midsummer. So timing rather than skill tends to separate a smooth radish harvest from a disappointing one. Because the whole growing cycle wraps up before most pest populations even build to damaging levels, radishes rarely face serious insect problems, and the biggest challenge most beginners encounter is simply remembering to thin overcrowded seedlings so each root has enough room to swell properly underground. That speed also makes radishes an ideal way to mark rows planted with slower germinating crops like carrots, since the radishes sprout first, show exactly where the row sits, and get pulled out of the ground long before their slower neighbors even need the space. A row of radishes ready in under a month also makes an excellent confidence builder for anyone gardening for the first time, offering a real tangible harvest before most other vegetables in the same bed have even finished sprouting. The bush green bean. Unlike their climbing pole bean relatives, bush green beans grow as compact, self-supporting plants that need no trellis, no staking, and almost no structural help at all to produce a heavy, reliable harvest right through the growing season. Soaking the seeds in water overnight before planting speeds up germination considerably, and once sown roughly an inch deep and a few inches apart in soil that is fully warmed after the last frost, the plants typically begin producing tender, pickable pods within 50 to 60 days. As legumes, bush beans host colonies of nitrogen-fixing bacteria along their roots, actively enriching the surrounding soil with nitrogen rather than depleting it the way many demanding, heavier-feeding vegetables tend to do. Meaning a bed of beans this season can genuinely improve conditions for whatever gets planted there next. Every entry on this list represents level 1 of a full vegetable difficulty ranking running across Garden's Lab, climbing from impossible to kill all the way up to nearly impossible to grow at home. With the next level posted every few days for anyone ready to move past the basics, regular picking is the only real maintenance this crop demands, since leaving mature pods on the vine signals the plant to slow down further production, while consistent harvesting keeps a single planting generating beans continuously for weeks. The zucchini. Few vegetables punish overplanting quite as thoroughly as zucchini, a summer squash so relentlessly productive that experienced gardeners routinely warn beginners to start with a single plant rather than an entire row. Once the soil has warmed well past the last frost date, seeds sown an inch deep in loose, sun-drenched soil germinate within about a week, and the resulting vine explodes into broad leaves and rapid growth almost immediately. A single healthy plant can produce several harvestable fruits every week once it hits its stride, and because zucchini grows fastest and most tender while still small, missing even a few days of checking the vine can mean returning to a fruit that ballooned overnight into something closer to a baseball bat than a vegetable. The plant's few real vulnerabilities, mainly squash vine borers and powdery mildew, tend to show up later in the season after a harvest has already been well underway, giving beginners a long, forgiving window of easy growth before any real troubleshooting becomes necessary. Its broad leaves also shade out competing weeds effectively once established, meaning a thriving zucchini plant does a fair amount of its own garden maintenance simply by growing as aggressively as it does. The plant's bright yellow flowers, both male and female appearing on the same vine, are typically pollinated by visiting bees without any help required, and a healthy patch left unharvested for even a week can quietly produce more squash than most households know what to do with. The lettuce. Lettuce rewards a gardener almost immediately, with tender young leaves ready for a first harvest in as little as 30 to 45 days after seeds first touch soil. Because the plant only needs a shallow layer of loose soil and consistent moisture to germinate, seeds can be scattered directly across a bed or container and lightly covered, skipping the more finicky transplant process many other vegetables require. The real advantage of lettuce lies in how it is harvested, since snipping the outer leaves with scissors rather than pulling the entire plant allows the center to keep producing fresh growth for weeks, turning one planting into a rolling, repeated harvest rather than a single one-time crop. Lettuce prefers the cooler temperatures of spring and fall, and while intense summer heat can cause the plant to bolt, sending up a bitter flowering stalk earlier than intended, simply providing some afternoon shade or timing the planting around the hottest weeks of the year sidesteps the problem entirely. With shallow roots and a short growing window, lettuce also works exceptionally well in containers and small raised beds, making it one of the most forgiving crops available to anyone without much outdoor space to spare. Sowing a new short row every couple of weeks throughout the cool growing season, a practice gardeners call succession planting, keeps a steady supply of tender young leaves coming in rather than one large harvest arriving all at once and then disappearing for the rest of the year. The pea. Among the earliest crops a gardener can plant each year, peas tolerate cold soil and light frost well enough to go into the ground weeks before most other vegetables would even survive the temperature. Seeds sown about an inch deep along a simple trellis or fence line need little more than consistent moisture during germination, and the resulting vines typically produce their first mature, pickable pods within 50 to 70 days. Like green beans, peas belong to the legume family and actively fix nitrogen in the soil through a partnership with root-dwelling bacteria, leaving the growing bed measurably richer by the time the harvest wraps up for the season. Because peas thrive in cool weather and decline quickly once summer heat arrives, most of their productive growing window happens before pest and disease pressure has a chance to build significantly, giving beginners a genuinely low-maintenance crop from planting straight through to harvest. A simple trellis, fence, or even a few sturdy twigs pushed into the soil gives the climbing tendrils something to grip, and once that basic support is in place, the vines largely take care of climbing and producing on their own. The kale. Few vegetables tolerate neglect and harsh weather quite as well as kale, a leafy green that actually improves in flavor after being touched by a light frost, converting stored starches into sugars that soften its naturally bitter edge. Seeds sown directly into garden soil germinate reliably within a week to 10 days, and the resulting plants shrug off cold snaps that would wilt more delicate greens, often continuing to produce harvestable leaves well into the early weeks of winter in many climates. Kale also faces relatively few serious pest problems compared to other leafy greens, its tough, slightly bitter leaves proving less appealing to many common garden insects than the softer foliage of lettuce or spinach growing nearby. Harvesting works the same forgiving way it does with lettuce, since picking the outer, more mature leaves while leaving the central growing point intact allows a single plant to keep producing fresh growth continuously for months rather than requiring a full replanting after each harvest. That combination of cold tolerance, pest resistance, and a harvest window stretching across multiple seasons makes kale one of the few vegetables capable of filling a garden bed with fresh greens long after most other crops have already finished for the year. Its dense nutritional profile only adds to the appeal, giving beginners a crop that demands almost nothing in return for one of the longest, steadiest harvests available from a single planting. The garlic. Garlic asks for almost nothing beyond correct timing. Planted not in spring like most vegetables, but in fall, roughly 4 to 6 weeks before the first hard frost settles in for the season. Individual cloves go into loosened soil about 2 inches deep with the pointed end facing upward, spaced several inches apart. And from there, the plant spends the entire winter quietly establishing roots underground while showing little to no visible growth above the surface. A period of sustained cold below 40 degrees Fahrenheit is actually required for the plant to properly form distinct cloves later on, meaning the harsh winter weather that threatens most other crops is doing essential, unseen work for this one the entire time. Once spring arrives, green shoots emerge and the plant resumes active growth largely unattended, needing only a layer of mulch to suppress competing weeds, and the occasional watering during unusually dry stretches before a full head of garlic is finally ready to dig up the following summer. Because so little day-to-day attention is required across that entire 8 to 9 month growing cycle, garlic has earned a reputation among gardeners as one of the truest set-it-and-forget-it crops available. rewarding a single afternoon of planting with a harvest that stores for months afterward. A single fall planting session, requiring little more than separating a bulb into individual cloves and pressing each one into the ground, can yield an entire year's supply of homegrown garlic for a household willing to wait out the winter. The Swiss chard. Few leafy greens shrug off bad weather quite as completely as Swiss chard, a crop that keeps producing through summer heat that would send lettuce bolting and cold snaps that would blacken more delicate greens overnight. Seeds sown directly into garden soil about half an inch deep germinate within 1 to 2 weeks, and the resulting plants settle in with remarkably few demands once established, tolerating poor soil, inconsistent watering, and a wide swing of temperatures better than almost anything else grown for its leaves. Harvesting works exactly like kale and lettuce. Since snapping off the outer, most mature stalks near the base leaves the central growing point untouched and still producing, turning one planting into a harvest that can stretch across an entire growing season rather than ending after a single cutting. Its brightly colored stalks, ranging from pure white to vivid red, orange, or gold, depending on the variety, also make it one of the few vegetables attractive enough to plant directly among flowers without looking out of place. Pests and diseases rarely trouble this crop seriously, and a handful of plants tucked into any sunny corner of a garden bed can quietly keep supplying fresh greens from late spring all the way through the first hard frost of the year. That combination of visual appeal, weather tolerance, and an almost endless harvest window makes Swiss chard one of the rare vegetables that performs just as reliably for a complete beginner as it does for someone who has been gardening for decades.